Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we are talking about the changes law schools are making to grading in the midst of the coronavirus 19 outbreak. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about what schools are doing about grades, everyone's favorite topic, in light of this new COVID-19 reality we're living in. And just to put this in context, we are recording this on March 28th, which I will note is a Saturday. That's how excited we are. And this is all of the information available to us today. So who knows what the world's going to look like when we release this, but this is what we're talking about on the 28th. All right. Well, we're getting a lot of questions on this, right?
Yeah, I think we're at least getting a couple emails a day around this topic because I think it's such an bizarre time, but then it's also crazy to watch the law schools just kind of panic and start to make these huge shifts. And of course, because law schools are what they are, there's very little consistency in what's happening. And I think that just creates a lot of anxiety for students.
Yeah, so we're getting a ton of questions like, how is pass-fail going to impact my transfer application or my job application? Or I thought I was going to do better this semester and now I don't have that opportunity. What should I tell employers? These are all great questions.
Yeah, so we're going to try and, share a bit about what's going on around the country with some different law schools and kind of the pros and cons for law schools taking this approach, and then try and answer some of these questions that have been coming in through our contact form. And just so you guys know, if you want to keep sending us questions, we're happy to do podcasts on this issue because, hey, we're all home. We can still create podcasts from our remote
locations. Lee just really wants to not hang out with her children 24/7, right?
It's true. It's
like,
a
Mommy has to work.
Excuse. Mommy has to work. But maybe before we dive in, Alison, we're kind of, in where we live in the Bay Area, we're kind of 2 weeks in to the shelter-in-place orders that were set in California. How do you think that things have changed for you a couple weeks into this new reality?
Well, I feel like the first week particularly is everyone's just sort of running around sort of in shock and trying to figure out where their food's going to come from and if they have enough toilet paper. I was talking to a friend of mine who's in New York actually last night, and he was kind of explaining like he had been in that situation, fairly recently. I'm like, oh, right, you're in the panicking about food part. Okay, you're going to get over that. So,
Right.
That's going to calm down. You're going to figure out your food supply. And then maybe you can start to focus on your actual job. He's self-employed as well. And he's like, well, this is going to be crazy. So, I think people probably do settle into some type of a rhythm, but obviously it's, a lot of stress for everyone and things are not really that easy just on a daily basis.
Yeah, we circulated amongst our team an article that was in the Harvard Business Review about how a lot of the emotions and the processes people are going through is anticipatory grief. Mm-hmm. And that you're really moving through the stages of grief, but you're looking at what you might lose or what you dream you're losing or you're in the process of losing instead of like dealing with a sudden loss. Right. And so I was thinking about my own, reactions from like panic and this can't be happening. And then you're kind of like marching towards pseudo acceptance of like, well, this is now where we are, buckle up. We got to figure out how to make it work. We have a business to run. We have, families and people we care about that we need to help. And then we all just kind of have to keep putting one foot in front of the other. So there definitely feels to be a shift at the end of 2 weeks of this for me. I'm not happy and I would still prefer to like press the rewind button and
right.
like go back. But I definitely, so if you are in a place, I guess the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because I think California, the Bay Area, is a little bit ahead of some parts of the country. If you are still in that panic mode or this is all still very new, the coping does become slightly easier, I think.
Yeah, I think, some Russian friend of mine said there's a Russian proverb that like humans are like cockroaches, we'll get used to anything, which is very Russian, but also sort of helpful. It's like, well, we are kind of used to it now. We're like, all right, okay, this is just the reality that we're living in for the moment. So let's deal with it and figure out, how to make it functional.
Yeah. All right. Well, the way we're functioning today is working. So, so we were debating about whether or not we have enough information to really cover this topic. So we also want to let people know that we're probably going to do follow-up episodes as more and more information comes down the pipe about how schools are really going to set up their grading and what we do with this information. But we wanted to try and start answering questions now, but stay tuned because there's probably going to be more on this topic later.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I think the first question, both of us had is like, well, a lot of schools are considering or have already voted that they're going to switch grading to pass fail in some capacity. Is this a good thing or not?
Yeah, so this was interesting because I was doing research for this podcast this morning, and my first instinct was, of course it's a good thing. These people are stressed and they're in extreme situations, and it kind of levels the playing field, and they're doing remote learning. Like, I kind of had this very gut reaction, was like, of course. And then there are actually a few compelling arguments out there that made me question whether or not this was always the best thing. So it's not as, like most things, right? It's not as clean cut as it first seems. So I think the goal that the law schools are having with the switching to pass fail is trying to create a cushion for students who may be struggling with the new remote, I can't say that apparently, the new remote format that the law schools are teaching in. And they're also worried about leveling the playing field for students who have children at home, who are homeschooling, who are taking care of other family members, and maybe in a situation where they can't adequately study and perform.
Well, or people may themselves or someone in their family may be getting sick.
Right. Yes. Or they might be in a high risk group and they're very concerned about getting sick and really have to limit what they can do. And so it's an additional level of, stress and fear. Or even if you're in a community that's really hit hard by the virus, even if you're not sick yourself, there might be ramifications there about, your movement, what you can do, how you can study, how you can do things. We don't know. I've heard reports that some areas it's very hard to get reliable bandwidth because everybody is at home now,
right,
using the internet.
Yeah, no, I actually saw an article recently about like different cities were having, drops of like 30 to 40% in their speed just because everyone was using it.
Yeah. So these are, problems that we don't even know exist are starting to pop up. And I think that's what the schools are trying to say is like, hey, let's just remove this fear around grades. And there's no way that we can figure out how to level this playing field. So, hey, let's just say that this is a crazy time. Let's, let students finish their coursework, get some sort of credit and move on.
Right. Which I'm sympathetic, generally speaking, to that argument.
Yes, I am too. As I said, that was my first gut reaction. I think one of the things that was interesting to me was some of the arguments that were presented, not saying I think they weigh out or that they win out, but of why you may not want to be in this pass fail. So, we have heard from students, that they are doing well academically this semester. They've made a lot of changes and they wanted to perform and they don't think they're going to be able to. I also read an article that was talking about the importance of students at lower ranked institutions, so not like T14 institutions, that grades are really how students from those institutions differentiate themselves and get job opportunities and get, publishing opportunities. And those class rankings and the grades that come from those classes are critically important to the next step in their legal career. And taking that away from them can hurt a student there that maybe it doesn't hurt a student at Harvard.
I mean, sure, but it's one semester.
No, I mean, I still think it's a good thing. I was just raising the research that I did. I thought it was interesting.
It was interesting. I mean, the article you sent me, I'll be honest, I was a little like, seriously, like, could we be any more or any less sympathetic to like the actual condition of the world right now? But yes. Maybe we don't need to link to that one because I don't really necessarily want that on the record that I just said that. But anyway, you can probably go figure some stuff out. But I mean, I think some people like, the bulk of that article is basically like, suck it up, buttercup, like people need to learn to deal. Which I'm not sympathetic to that right now.
No, I think that one of the arguments that came out of that was saying that, law students need to learn how to prevail in adverse conditions. And I think that is a ridiculous argument. These are not adverse conditions. This is not like the extreme nature of what our community is going through right now, it's not that it's just I don't know that it compares to what most
I also just feel like that's basically everything in a nutshell that is wrong with the entire like setup of the legal profession.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, we have to pretend that like we're not humans and that we don't have other things going on and we just have to suck it up. It's like even courts are not operational right now. Like just,
right.
Like are grades really that big of a problem right this second? I don't think so. Like if the courts can't function, maybe people could just get a pass,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think one of the other kind of poor arguments was without grades, we can't identify as faculty who needs academic support and who needs academic help. But I'm pretty sure that through feedback, professors could still identify that class of people.
I mean, they could basically like know, okay, this is the person I would have given the worst grade in the class to. Maybe I could reach out to that person directly and see if they need help. I don't know. Right. Just a suggestion, throwing it out there.
I mean, I think that this is a time for our being very compassionate. And I agree. I didn't, I think it was one of those, when I read that article, I hadn't even come up with very many counter arguments for it other than
I gave you some.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the best I'd heard was students saying, but I would be at the top of that curve and I won't be able to be at the top of that curve. I get that. But yeah, I mean, most of it was a little harsh for the horrendous reality that we're all living through right now.
Right. And the reality also is that reality is different depending on where people are living.
Yes, very true.
I mean, anyone who's in New York City right now is living a very different reality than someone who is in like a different part of the country that maybe hasn't been so impacted by this yet.
Right. And as we said, in the Bay Area, we are multiple weeks into kind of this shelter at home, kind of like definitely extreme social distancing. And, family in the South, they don't even have shelter in place at home in most states.
Yeah, so. No, my mother's in North Carolina. I'm getting the stories. The Walmart parking lot is full. I'm like, do not go there. I know, like, right? Please listen to me on this. Like, don't do it.
I know, exactly. So I think, I land on the opinion that I think that grades are the least of our concerns right now. And I understand them wanting to finish the academic year in some way, but it seems that this kind of definitive approach may be the cleanest way to go. But of course, because law schools can't do any, it's like we got to still muddy the water. It's like I read these articles and I was like, okay, I see counter arguments, but yeah, I think we should do pass fail. And then you start to hear that there are schools doing all sorts of really strange things. So we thought we'd share some of them with you.
Which are kind of wacky, let's be honest.
Some of them are wacky. Okay, we're going to go from maybe least wacky to super wacky. So there are also schools that are offering optional pass-fail grading. And I think this is the trickiest one because then it really forces the students to try and decide if they should get real grades or not. And then I don't even fully understand how they would be able to deal with that with the curve as well, especially for 1L classes. So it seems very hard to implement. But a lot of students were not happy with this. In fact, this was the option that Harvard started with. And then even though they don't do typical grades in their 1L classes, but they were like, oh, okay, never mind. We'll just do pass fail.
Yeah. Then also there's like the option I've heard of, the option that you can switch to pass fail after you see your grades, or maybe you have to decide before. So those are also different. it sounds very confusing.
Yeah. And, it's really hard based on your own situation, going back to what we were talking about of like, somebody who's has small children that they're now responsible, has a partner who's a first responder or medical professional,
or both, as someone who wrote to us did.
Right. Or both, someone who is, caring for a sick family member, somebody who's sick themselves. I think that it's forcing a really difficult choice on a population that is already going to be very strained.
Well, and it's also like when you have to make that choice. Things may look very different a month from now in various places. Like people can't know at this point how they're going to be impacted when they have exams. That's weeks from now. Like we can't even say what's going to happen basically tomorrow.
Right. That's why we put the date on this, but we never put dates on podcasts.
Yeah, but we were like, we should probably say when we're talking about this because things might look really different in a week when it's released.
Right. Exactly. So, I do think that, if your school is doing this option, it would be interesting if there is still pushback and dialogue around it, or if they've made this final decision. But I think you really have to look at your own personal situation and the information that you have and find out when you have to make this decision. Because I am a risk averse person, if I was one of those folks who had more responsibilities at home, taking care of lots of other people, whatever might come up, I would probably take that pass-fail option just in case.
Right. And also just because it lets you move on basically with your life. Like, yeah, you still have to study, but
right.
You have other things to do.
Yeah. So then comes, I think, the kookiest of all of them, which was, I hadn't read about this until today, although I know it was circulating. So apparently Arizona State Law School is offering post-grading applications to convert to pass-fail. But I just thought I would actually read the whole thing if you haven't read it yet. I found this on Above the Law, and it was one of those things I had to read multiple times because you just didn't believe it. So students whose calculated spring 2020 GPA is less than their cumulative GPA and who submit a post-grading request for pass-fail accommodation will be subject to the following procedures. Students must articulate how COVID-19 adversely affected their ability to succeed in their coursework. In cases where students have suffered a significant downward departure in their spring 2020 GPA from their cumulative GPA, and then they give percentages, students should expect a lower standard of review. In cases where with a smaller downward departure, and they give percentages, students should expect a higher standard of review. And if this accommodation is granted, then all of your grades for spring 2020 will be converted to pass-fail. I mean, only lawyers could come up with this.
There's so much weird stuff going on in here, too.
It is so weird. I mean, there are so many things that are wrong with this plan. First of all, the amount of private information, including possible medical information of you or people close to you that you would have to divulge, is really inappropriate.
Yeah, I'm not even sure how this would qualify under various privacy laws, but
I mean,
or the ADA or pick your law. I don't really think it's a great idea.
No, not to mention the fact that if you are in a category of student who is under so much stress from one thing or another that your grades plummeted because of COVID-19, the last thing you need to do is write an essay on it.
Right. And do interviews. The whole thing seems nuts.
I know, the whole thing seems nuts. And so the whole goal here is to kind of protect a population in your student body. It does not feel like they're protecting you. It feels a little bit more like they're throwing you under the bus. Because they're saying, well, you have so much other stuff going on that you underperformed, so now you have to overperform.
Now you have to prove to us, right, that you underperformed for this reason. No, it's kind of I don't know if you read carefully the California tax abatement or postponement rule, but in that it said something along the lines of taxpayers who can show that they are impacted by COVID-19, blah, 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 don't have to pay. So, of course, being lawyers like me and all my lawyer friends freaked out and reached out to our CPA being what does this mean? And basically the state came back and said, we're going to assume every taxpayer in the state is negatively impacted.
Right.
Next question. You don't have to show us.
We're not adjudicating.
That's kind of what it made it sound like. And at first you were like, oh my God, what do we have to show? I have to provide whatever. And they're like, no, you're all impacted. And I think that's kind of the point here. Everyone is impacted in some way. And for a panel of people to have to sit there and decide if you're sufficiently impacted, and also the whole if it only impacts you a little bit, we're not concerned about it. The whole thing is crazy. This is a crazy thing to do.
So crazy. I kind of thought it was a joke when I read it, and then I realized it was not a joke. So for those of you at Arizona State, I would maybe write a letter, petition. I'd be interested to see if this is what it ends up being at the end of the semester. But there seem to be a whole lot of concerns that need to be addressed.
Yeah, I feel I don't know. For me, I'm just can't we just treat people like they're grown-ups? And if someone comes and they says look, I need this accommodation for this reason, can't we just be you know what? Okay. Is the world going to end at that point because someone gets one out of 6 semesters, they get pass-fail? Really? Is it that big of a deal?
I know. I think people might be worrying about the wrong things.
I feel it's kind of projecting our anxiety onto something else. Maybe someone's going to try to cheat the system and not study for their torts final. It's well, maybe they do,
That one person or somebody who's not up biting their nails at night because they're reading the news and worried about people they care about. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't think that's the way to go for fairness. And then there are some schools that are just going on with traditional grading. The University of Chicago is,
of course,
had a lot of blowback on this, but they have their own reasoning for why that they want to keep their grades.
That reason being we're Chicago.
We are Chicago, and we will do it our own way. And then the University of Georgia School of Law has claimed that the overall university system is blocking any changes. And Kemp, who's the governor of Georgia, if people remember, ran against Stacey Abrams. He's basically saying they won't shut down it. Like, they haven't done a big shelter in place in Georgia. Like, counties are having to take actions because the state won't take action. So they're like, maybe it's believable that the university system won't allow it. But apparently, the University of Georgia told the students not to go to the media to talk about it.
Yeah, that was likely to work.
Like, who does that? But you don't be mad at us, and please don't tattle on us to the media, because you tell it to a whole bunch of lawyers and law students, or a whole bunch of law students, and they're all going to go immediately email about the law. Like, I mean, that's what people do.
Yeah. It's also ironic because I read that some county in Georgia apparently has one of the worst rates of anywhere in the country. But
like Athena or something like that. Yeah.
Something Albany.
Athens, maybe
I don't think it was Athens. It was somewhere in the middle. Albany. I don't know.
Albany.
Anyway, point being, they have problems too,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's likely that their students are suffering. So schools telling their students not to talk about what's going on, also not compassionate, not really being helpful. So I guess.
And ultimately counterproductive, because now we're talking about you. Sorry.
Right. Sorry. Not looking real great for you, University of Georgia. Okay. So that's kind of what's happening that I could find as of this morning on the landscape around the country. It does seem that most schools are going to move to this strict pass-fail. And so then kind of, what are the consequences? I think that's what a lot of people aren't sure about. People are worried about the job hunt and what that's going to mean for your grades. And I think that, the OCI process and all of that will adapt. I mean, they're going to have to adapt.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen speculation. Maybe they wait another semester and do it later. I mean, who knows? That's a slow-moving ship. So it's going to be pretty hard to turn that one around. But we'll see. I mean, again, I think it was Seth Godin had a post about this. He's like, yeah, things will be different and we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
That's about all you can say right now.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, it's like 9/11, but continues to happen.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. For those of you on this podcast who don't remember 9/11, you may not know what we were talking about.
I'm sure they know.
Well, they know.
They're aware it happened, but yeah.
They were aware it happened. We were grown-ups when 9/11 happened.
Yeah.
Okay, so the job hunt, I mean, people are going to have to figure it out. The recruiters are going to figure out how they want to interview applicants. They might look at their timelines. They might accept other grades. I think the reality is that, it's going to influence everybody. The OCI process may pivot, but then if all of these schools shift to pass-fail, then that's what everybody's transcripts look like. I think you can't think that your transcript's going to make you a special snowflake and make it impossible for you to get a job.
No, I mean, it just means people are basically being judged more on their first semester grades, which, it is what it is. I mean, the other factor, which we've discussed on a different podcast, is not you and I, but Sadie and I, is, I can't imagine a lot of these firms are going to be super eager to take on a ton of summer associates right now anyway, but go listen to that podcast if you want to hear our opinions around that. So things are going to be shifting. Yeah. Obviously you can't raise your GPA if you can't get grades.
Right. That is unfortunate. Yeah, it is what it is. Everyone's in the same boat, but yes, that is what it is. You will have more semesters, hopefully, things will return to some version of normal, whatever that new normal is in the fall, and then you can get grades in the fall. And then you made the good point. It's like one of 6 semesters. And so you might have to delay raising that GPA. And that's just one of the many losses that people are going to get, just like they were saying about our taxes, everyone's negatively affected. It's just what your individual negative effects are going to be.
Yeah. I think potentially this could have, an impact on law review and journal applications, things like that. Again, people are going to have to figure it out. Maybe they put more weight on your writing sample, something like that.
Yep.
Or, maybe they just look at those first semester grades. Sorry if you didn't do well.
Yeah. I think transfer applicants are wondering. We got somebody writing into us about transfer applications. Usually they make decisions based mostly on those first semester grades because of how long it can take to get those second semester grades. But again, the schools are just going to make decisions based on the information that they have. I don't think that if you have a great application, I don't know that pass fail is going to mean you're not going to get into your transfer school.
Well, I think anyone who's really thinking seriously about transferring at this point is basing that on their first semester grades. So this could actually end up being a good thing for you because you did really well first semester. Now you don't really have to worry about it as much. Just apply with your first semester grades and most likely you'll get it anywhere you would have gotten in with your second ones.
Yeah. So I think the big thing is we just need law schools to make these choices now and don't waver and don't do what Harvard did, is pick one direction and then go to another direction. And that is just so confusing. And I think in this time where so many things are out of our control, many people who are lawyers and law students who like to control things are really struggling with ambiguity. And so, our uncertainty. And I think that the best thing the schools can do is pick a direction and stay with it so that students can acclimate to that reality and get ready for these exams.
I think that's right. Even the bar is basically doing this. They're saying, we're going to announce a decision as of this date. It's okay, great. Now everyone can basically stop worrying about that for the moment. And schools just need to be like, you know what? We've decided to do X and this is what we're doing and deal with it.
Right. And maybe a lot of law professors shouldn't write op-eds about it once the decisions are made because the decisions are made.
Just saying. Might not be the best use of anyone's time to write or read that.
Yeah. Kind of like I don't need to be sent one more article on all the beautiful things I'm supposed to be doing as a parent.
On how much free time you have.
I have free time and just that, these are the times where we need to make sure that we are, not responding to things on our phones and not doing this, not doing that. And I was reading this article and I was like, well, first of all, I'm getting news alerts. I don't even get news alerts on my phone. I've taken those off years ago, but I get we call them Nixie or whatever, the emergency alert. I get those to my Apple Watch, whatever, they come in. And also I was like, I am also helping run this business. I am also the president of a nonprofit board that is trying to stay afloat. I am also a parent to two small children who I'm trying to keep happy and healthy, and family members that we're trying to support and keep happy and healthy. Come on, this is not a time for me to develop new self-care routines and become an ideal home and schooling parent. And there's a lot of messaging around that right now. And it's really hard I need to not read it. That's my own self-editing. But sometimes it sucks you in and then it feels judgmental as you go. But
yeah. No, I just really love that into with everyone's spare time while you're hanging out at home. I'm like, who are these people?
I know.
I don't even have children, but I'm, going over several times a week to try to keep my nephew alive and running errands for friends who don't have cars or can't leave. I'm just like, who is this? Who are these people sitting at home doing nothing? I don't know.
I know. We are as a community all trying to, keep everyone put together so we can ride this out.
It's a lot.
While also sheltering in place and taking care of ourselves, Yeah.
Anyway, that's slightly off topic.
Just so we're all struggling. Okay, but I did, before we wind up this podcast, I did want to touch on a few specific listener questions that had come in that I thought were interesting. So one was kind of how you stay motivated when you aren't fighting for that spot on the curve. And I thought this was a very honest question because I think the intensity of the curve does motivate a lot of people.
Yeah, so that's external motivation. Hopefully you have some type of internal motivation that is also motivating you, because this is when the time you need to draw on that. You've got to make sure you pass. So, you've got to work at least sufficiently hard to do that. But, this is a time to really focus on these other reasons that you're doing this. Why are you in law school? What motivated you to do this? Why are you taking these classes if they're classes you got to choose?
Right.
How does studying this semester help you reach these goals? There are a lot of reasons that you might want to study for your class. Hopefully besides just the prospect that you might do well in it.
Yeah. And I think that, if you're a 1L, you're going to revisit all this material when you're studying for the bar. So that's another motivation. You're still working on developing relationships with professors. I know that a lot of professors are doing FaceTime office hours or Zoom meetings, or, are really trying to still engage with students. And, this can be a great opportunity to engage with your professors in a different way, because you may need letters of recommendation down the road. If you have a paper class, you might be working on writing samples. There's so many reasons other than just a 1-letter grade that you want to be successful beyond just being good at what you do. And you want to be a lawyer and be licensed and be able to go good in the world. And I did see one thing that I was reading today, which I thought was true. And it said, in the aftermath of all of this, there are going to need to be a lot of good lawyers to help us sort out what happens now.
Right.
What happens in the justice system now that things have kind of ground to a halt? What happens to keep prisoners safe? What happens as we all, as different kinds of restrictions and different kinds of benefits and different kinds of, there's a bunch happening in California around evictions, and now they're not going to be able to evict anybody for not paying rent for a period of time. I mean, there are going to be legal issues up the wazoo that need really smart, talented people to help us figure out this new reality. So there's so many good reasons to become a lawyer right now. So if nothing else, maybe just keep laying the groundwork that you can be part of figuring out what this new world feels like.
Yeah, I mean, I just almost think it's kind of sad if people are like, I can't be bothered to study if I don't have the possibility of making an A-. It's just like, is that really your actual motivation? Because if that is, I'm not sure that you should continue in law school.
Yeah. I think the other thing is, and I've seen this with other friends, in Europe, they have much more intense restrictions on movement than they do even in California and the Bay Area. And, a lot of my friends live alone and are kind of living a very strange alone life where they're like not leaving their house for 7 days because they have to have a permission slip and they don't have a printer. So they have to hand write out a permission slip. I mean, it's very strange. I mean, it's very extreme. But, I think that you have people in those situations who are acclimating and then finding that they are working on projects or getting into something. I think once the shock of some of the situation can wear off, although I think it will ebb and flow, you can refocus and say, okay, well, the thing that I can be productive at is working on law school, because law school kind of makes sense when the world does not make sense. Yeah,
it's a very confined box of all right, I just have to sit down and learn this topic. I can do that. Great. It gives me something to do all day long.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think grades can be a motivation for people, but also, I mean, the whole thing in law school is you don't really control your grades in the end anyway. It's on a curve. So what we always say to people anyway is you only control your input. You don't control the output. So I think even more so, think about why are you doing this and what are your goals and what are you willing to put into it? And for different people in different scenarios, that might look really different, and that's totally fine.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Sometimes we ask our students when they're studying for the bar or when they're really struggling to write letters to themselves about why they chose this path or what's important about being a lawyer. And that way they can read it when they have moments kind of that are a crisis of faith. It's an interesting exercise. That's also something simple, free that you can do while staying home. All right. One more question before we wind up that was sent in by a listener was that there are rules around accreditation and the number of pass-fail classes that schools can have. And there are some schools that are not ABA accredited who are on that borderline of maybe losing state accreditation. And so somebody wrote in and said, do you think that this will cause my school to lose accreditation? And I really doubt it.
Yeah.
I think that,
no. I thought it was a really interesting question. It's not something that occurred to me, but I was like, there's no way this is going to happen.
No, I think not at all. I mean, I think that there might be ramifications for schools as far as, losing student populations, losing money. There might be other problems, but I don't think this is one of them. The ABA, and I know in California, state accreditation is a big thing. The California bar does not want to go close a bunch of law schools over this. That is not.
No, they're not going to be again, one semester of pass-fail grade. Suddenly you have to not graduate your class. That's not going to happen. That isn't in nobody's interest, basically.
No.
Yeah.
And I think it's also just very important to think long term, down the road, 10 years from now in your career, you may be talking about this very weird time. Where were you in the spring of 2020? But people are not going to be did your school have pass-fail grades? Like,
No.
what happened to your school? Like, that's not what anyone's going to be talking to you about professionally. At that point, you will have graduated, you will have passed the bar, you will be practicing. This will be part of your story, but it's not going to be a defining moment in your story. And I think as much as you can kind of hold that, that will help you kind of get through this.
Yeah, well, it's also, none of this is anyone's fault, you know?
No.
I mean, it's not like you had any control really over what your school decided to do. I mean, even if you personally decided to opt for pass-fail over a grade, like, nobody's going to probably ever even notice that or know that. And if they did, you're like, yeah, I was in like a situation where that made sense for me. Next question.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So other than telling everyone to hang in there on this wild ride, do you have any other thoughts about this before we wind up?
I think people just have to try to keep perspective, you know? And I think sometimes I've seen this with a number of people that I know. It's kind of easy to transfer anxiety to a certain very specific type of thing. And that thing is very identifiable. And so that can become tempting of like, you're just so obsessed about, this topic of like, my school is doing this or not doing this, or it's like, okay, you got to take a step back and be like, this is happening. This is what it is. And I just need to, kind of take a deep breath and move on and like do something more productive, because it can get really easy, I think, to spiral into that anxiety around these like very specific topics.
I think that's true. And I was talking on the phone to a friend who is a school teacher in Chicago, a good friend of mine. And I was asking him how the transition had been, because he had to move all of his curriculum online. And he said, doesn't everyone want to learn how to teach an online course and draft it and figure out how to do everything in 3 days, because I had 3 days notice. And I will say that, putting it that way, like, you and I have developed a lot of online content. We teach online, we do virtual tutoring, we have created online content for almost a decade now. We have learned a lot of painful lessons in that process.
Yeah, it's ugly when you start.
It's not pretty. And I think that what we all need to somewhat try and do, including myself, is to have compassion for the people who are trying to change quickly. And law schools and law professors don't like change.
Right. Well, and also the way that law school has traditionally been taught is not really conducive to an online experience, even more so than other, for example, undergraduate classes where people might be lecturing, and that, lends itself more to just sit in your office and lecture. That's not really how law schools function.
Right. And so there might be a sense of loss by the student over that too. And that's okay. I think it's a time to think about what you're missing and see if you can create it in a different scenario, like a conversation with your professor or a study group where you can dialogue about things or whatever it might be. This isn't not going to be a perfect translation of the classroom, but you still have to own the process and get the most out of it as you can.
Right. And I think focus your time on figuring those type of things out rather than obsessing over you're not going to be able to get a grade.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. We'll have to check our obsessions. I mean, I've definitely had my moments where I am like super angry about things.
I spent 30 minutes yesterday trying to figure out which dishwashing liquid pods to order on Amazon. I mean, awesome. There's a lot of calculation that goes into this. Like, when can they get them? Like, should I get the like mint flavor over the free and clear? Is that going to make my dishes smell? But it says it'll get here 2 days earlier. You can go crazy on a lot of things.
You can. You really can. I mean, we all have a lot of floating anxiety. So you have to be careful about where you send it.
I still have an entire, I think, unopened package of these. I'm just planning ahead.
Because you're a very good planner.
No, because I literally basically had a panic attack when I realized I only had one bag left and I didn't know how long this was all going to last.
It's true. And because we're home all the time, I'm running my dishwasher.
Yeah, exactly. I run it all the time now, because all I do is basically stress cook.
Right.
So we're in there with you, all right? Is what we're saying.
It's imperfect. These are murky waters, and we're all just gonna like muddle through together, because there's no other option. Yeah. But I found it very therapeutic to call some friends and talk to some people that I haven't talked to. In fact, I am going to leave this podcast to go to a virtual surprise birthday Zoom conference for a good friend's 40th birthday, who's also a lawyer. And, we're making it work. So take a deep breath and talk to a friend.
And don't worry about if your school is going past fail or not.
No,
it ultimately just really doesn't matter that much.
It doesn't matter. I know. All right. Well, with that, since I have to get to my Zoom birthday party.
Can't be late for the surprise party.
Can't be late for the surprise party. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Like we said, we're taking suggestions for what you guys would like us to talk about, so please do write in. We're happy to hear what you're struggling with.
Probably it's not your Amazon orders.
Probably not. But you never know. I don't know that we can, maybe Alison, we could do a podcast on what dishwashing
no.
No. So thanks for listening, everybody. Please stay safe, social distance, and we'll talk to you soon.